wait for me. I'm coming to save you.
This is Leon Belmont, an honest and honorable knight living in 11th century Europe, alongside his friend and master tactician, Matthias Kronkvist. They're local legends known for their unstoppable nature in battle. But tragedy strikes when Matthias' wife Elisabetha suddenly passes away. Matthias falls into despair and remains bedridden, and a whole year passes. Suddenly, monsters attack Leon's domain. Matthias tells him a vampire named Walter Bernhard is behind it, and that Leon's fiancée Sarah has been taken to his castle, shrouded in eternal darkness. Leon doesn't hesitate and goes in alone, armed with a whip forged from alchemy, but unfortunately, he's too late. Sarah's already been bitten. Before she fully turns into a vampire, she begs Leon to let her sacrifice herself, to infuse her soul into his whip so they can actually kill Walter. Leon reluctantly does so, and in his moment of lament, Sarah's soul transforms his whip into the vampire killer, the bane of creatures of the night, and with it, he slays Walter. But in a twist, it turns out Walter wasn't the real mastermind. It was Matthias, his own friend, who orchestrated everything just to steal Walter's power and become a powerful vampire himself, turning his back on God as revenge for the loss of his wife. Feeling betrayed, Leon swears that the Belmonts will hunt Matthias down for generations to come. Matthias disappears into the night, and over time, the world comes to know him as Dracula. And Leon's vow holds true. The Belmonts spent centuries hunting Dracula, only for him to be revived every 100 years. This cycle continues until 1999, where Dracula is permanently struck down by Julius Belmont, and his castle is sealed within the moon. For the first time in centuries, this nightmare is actually over. But in 2035, during a solar eclipse, the castle reappears, and Japanese student Soma Cruz is sucked into it, awakening an ability to absorb the souls of monsters to grow his own power. Within the castle, he learns he's the reincarnation of Dracula. But with the help of his friends, he stays true to his good nature and doesn't succumb to darkness, using his power to destroy the embodiment of chaos that was housed within the castle to end the nightmare once and for all. Evil fails to triumph because Soma, the reincarnation of Dracula, is that good person that did something. This was the beginning and end of Dracula, as told by Koji Igarashi, the lead producer on a majority of Castlevania games post Symphony of the Night, with him consolidating years of Castlevania lore into one clear timeline, attempting to fit new Castlevania stories where he could within the lore constraints that Dracula can only be revived once every 100 years. So at the beginning and end of Dracula's story being told, what was left for Castlevania? Now we're getting into that area of Castlevania where people say they're some of the best games, but also some of the most mediocre. And when Castlevania made one of the biggest shifts in the entire series. So if you clicked on this video and you haven't seen the other parts of my Castlevania series, I would recommend going back and consuming that before you get to this one. Otherwise, let's get into the fall and disappearance of Castlevania. Welcome to Mentoktober. It's 2005 and Konami is fresh off the release of Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow for Nintendo's latest handheld console, the Nintendo DS. A game that truly polished the Symphony of the Night formula, along with its unique tactical soul system, where the player could collect the souls of monsters and use them to diversify their playstyle. A Castlevania game with very deep mechanics that is looked back on fondly to this day. But that same year, Castlevania producer Iga and his team were taking another stab at a proper console game, drawing what they learned from Lament of Innocence to develop Castlevania: Curse of Darkness. Released in November 2005 for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox, Curse of Darkness brings us back to Wallachia in 1479, 3 years after the events of Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse. And yes, I'm correcting my pronunciation from previous videos. It's not Wallachia, it's Wallachia.
Western Wallachia.
Wallachia!
And Wallachia
ruler of Wallachia.
Can I get a Romanian in the comments to tell me which one is right? Jeez. Finally, we find out what Dracula's Curse is. After his defeat at the hands of Trevor and the gang, with his dying wish, he curses the land, which leads to Europe succumbing to plague and famine, with people's hearts turning black with murderous intent. Villages are pillaged while the weak are easily slain. So in Curse of Darkness, though it's the era of Trevor Belmont, a new protagonist was brought to the forefront, Hector, a devil forge master who previously was under Dracula's employ. Yeah, so if you ever wondered why Dracula stays so well stocked on demons, it's because there's a lucrative career opportunity for forgers who actually go out and create the demons themselves. It feels like this lore was new to Curse of Darkness, so Dracula had his own little human factories of forgers this whole time cranking out these demons for him. What next? We find out Dr. Eggman has actually had human slaves this whole time building robots for him?
Get a load of this!
Sega, maybe you can cook with that one. So serving a demon lord wasn't exactly Hector's vibe, so he relinquishes his powers and walked away from the life and settled down with his fiancée Rosalie. But like any Castlevania game, tragedy strikes when she's accused of witchcraft and burned at the stake with a sham trial orchestrated by Hector's fellow forge master, Isaac, who's still loyal to Dracula even after death. So the game begins with Hector rolling up to Isaac's castle for revenge, and Isaac is nice enough to greet him, scoffing at the idea of him relinquishing his power in the first place.
Hector, the fool who betrayed our Lord Dracula.
That matters not. I've come to exact my revenge upon you.
And what is this outfit? But he offers Hector an opportunity to settle the score and challenges him to regain his powers so they can duke it out. This kicks off the game with Hector going from level to level fighting hordes of monsters with the hack and slash style gameplay returning from Lament of Innocence. But combat is a little bit more fluid and diverse as Hector can wield multiple types of weapons instead of being stuck with the whip. Once again, you use square for basic combos and can mix in triangle moves for stronger attacks. And as you get better weapons throughout the game, Hector can perform more combos. Then there's this new innocent devil system introduced as well, with Hector being able to create devils through forgery that can support him in battle in multiple ways, like the fairy type who can help Hector with healing. So there are 6 devil types in total, each providing different battle benefits, and as you continue using them, you can level them up and evolve them into different forms. This system is surprisingly intricate as the devils have multiple abilities and stats, with each devil type having multiple forms. So basically it's Demon Tamagotchi. This kind of reminds me of that one Capcom game, Chaos Legion, where you can summon different types of legions that have their own abilities. Did anyone else play that game? And one huge difference here that has me put Curse of Darkness as a better game over Lament of Innocence is being able to control the camera freely. Apparently I wasn't the only one frustrated by a fixed camera in that game. Iga has said, "We worked really hard on the camera. The one request we constantly received from both Japanese and foreign players was to be able to move the camera." Laughs. Personally, I'm of the opinion that because Castlevania was originally a 2D game, a fixed camera was fine. When the camera is fixed, it's the developer's fault if you can't see an enemy. But when the camera is free, the player has the added stress of having to rotate it around to spot enemies. Ultimately, in the last game, we tried to make the game as easy to play as possible. But this time, I think we've managed to create a satisfying experience with a free camera, and show that it too is a viable option. So Hector will travel the Transylvanian countryside, strengthening his power to hunt down Isaac. And in comparison to Lament of Innocence, there's a lot more characters that Hector will run into during his journey, like Zed, a priest who's investigating the source of Dracula's curse, who serves as an informant for Hector throughout the game. Or Julia, a witch and exile who strongly resembles Hector's beloved Rosalie, who will become the shopkeeper of the game. Then there's Saint Germain, a mysterious man who claims he is a time traveler, and warns Hector that he should give up on his quest, since he seeks to maintain the flow of a greater will.
This is pointless. Out of my way!
Your beloved was killed on false allegations that she was a witch.
Rex, how do you know of these things?
Eventually, Saint Germain will entrust Hector with the fate of the timeline. But this character is actually based on a real 18th century count known as the Count of Saint Germain, who claimed he was over 300 years old, performed alchemy for French nobles, and at one time was arrested for being too mysterious. To this day, nobody actually knows who the real Count of Saint Germain was. He has no birth records, no real name. Even nobles and historians failed to identify him at that time. So he fits right in here. Hector will also encounter Trevor Belmont, who of course is still fighting the good fight, and at first he doesn't trust Hector due to his former employment.
Are you the Devil Forge Master?
I am.
Then this is the hour of your death.
Which leads to a battle between the two, but Trevor gains respect for Hector after realizing he left the devil forging life behind. So as the story goes along, Isaac will test Hector's power, and during their little skirmish, Isaac is told to stop by Julia, who we discover is his sister, so this of course pisses off Hector.
Brother!
But Julia reassures him that she wants him to defeat Isaac, but he's still not strong enough. So with Trevor's help, Hector gains access to a separate realm known as the Infinity Corridor. But Isaac is one step ahead, and in this realm channels Hector's power to summon a new incarnation of Dracula's castle. This was apparently his plan all along, and Trevor gets stabbed. Don't you hate it when protagonists who you played as in a previous game are just done dirty like this in sequel titles? How did you get caught slipping like this? But it's okay, because Julia later mentions that she saved Trevor's life somehow. I don't know how, you literally caught a blade right through your heart, my G. Either way, things are getting pretty bad, but Hector's convictions grow into something else beyond revenge. He knows now that demonic power is the source of Dracula's curse, and he intends to stop Isaac and rid the world of that curse, which leads to the final showdown between Isaac and Hector. But Hector has grown powerful enough to best him, and once he has Isaac on the ropes, he realizes that his thirst to murder him is a symptom of Dracula's curse, and in that moment of clarity manages to stop himself. Zed congratulates him for this and reveals that he's been death in disguise all along.
That weapon! You are none other than death!
Sitting on the sidelines in hope to collect a vessel for Dracula's return. Hector was originally the prime candidate, but with him rejecting Dracula's curse, that plan went out the window. So instead, Isaac is chosen as the host for Dracula, while Hector defeats death. I think Hector got a lot more here than he bargained for. So of course this leads to a final confrontation with a revived Dracula, who smack talks Hector for betraying him.
The traitor Hector.
But after they fight, Dracula finds out his transformation using Isaac wasn't complete. And Hector makes sure to tell him that with his power as a Forge Master,
I can turn your curse aside, transform it into something harmless, and so it shall be.
and after this elaborate ritual, Hector manages to finally rid the world of Dracula's curse, with him and Julia escaping and just leaving Isaac in this crumbling castle. The game ends on a good note with Hector learning to love again, with Julia at his side. But fuck Trevor, am I right? We never see him again, but it's mentioned that he survives. But if it's any consolation, you can play as him after completing the game, with him wielding the vampire killer and the usual Belmont subweapons. But Saint Germain gets in a last word and breaks the fourth wall, telling the player that the timeline is stabilized and he'll go into the future to witness the final battle between humans and Dracula.
Perhaps they will remember your fight.
I honestly think this was supposed to be a setup for a game taking place in 1999, where Julius Belmont finally finishes off Dracula. But we never got that game, and unfortunately, we will never see Saint Germain again. Curse of Darkness received a lukewarm response from critics, with an average of 74 on Metacritic, with them praising the improvements to the battle system, but once again the game's environments were dull and repetitive, leading to monotonous game design. I mentioned this in the last video, and I can't really explain it, but 3D Castlevania games up to this point failed to really capture what made Metroidvania-style games good. Lament of Innocence and Curse of Darkness seem to prioritize combat over exploration. And I guess you can say that these games are more like 3D versions of the original Castlevania games. But I'm curious to see a Castlevania game truly explore the Metroidvania formula in 3D. Metroid Prime pulls this off phenomenally, with Retro Studios at that time making sure the player had the time to breathe on Talon 4, to focus on exploration, finding new abilities, and taking in the world building. I think this is the key factor that the PS2 Castlevania games were missing, which just leads to the player trying to get Leon and Hector from point A to point B while fighting off enemies. Since these games kind of flew under the radar for me, I'm curious to get your thoughts or anybody in the comments who've played these at the time that they came out. I just want to get a gauge of how you guys felt about them, and I don't want to trample on anybody's childhood with my critiques. After this, there was no shortage of 2D Castlevania games out there, as Ego would move on to the next DS title that would be released a year later. Castlevania Portrait of Ruin dates back to November 2006, this time set in World War II Europe. The death and anguish of the war has caused Dracula's castle to reappear. And for the first time since Castlevania Bloodlines, we check back in on the Morris and Lacard family. 27 years have passed since the events of Bloodlines, and John Morris and Eric Lacard have settled down and had children of their own. The game opens with John's son Jonathan on his way to investigate Dracula's castle, now that he's the heir to the vampire killer, which doesn't fully love him back just yet. He's in a Belmont by direct male lineage, so he can't tap into its full power. The lore of this game addresses this by mentioning that when John used it in Bloodlines, using it drained a lot of his stamina over time, a warning he passes along to Jonathan. And joining Jonathan is his childhood friend Charlotte Allin, a sorceress gifted with magical power and a descendant of the Belnadas clan. And the hook this time is pretty different. A vampire painter known as Bronner hijacks the castle itself and scatters its power through paintings that our heroes will have to dive into like little pocket dimensions. This must have been the guy that helped Bowser that one time. So Jonathan and Charlotte will have to clear these portrait worlds to cut Bronner's hold on the castle so you can push deeper and stop the revival of Dracula. But Jonathan and Charlotte are not alone. Supported by Vincent, a priest and merchant who will sell them gear and spells. And there's this ghost that calls himself Wind, who provides rewards as the heroes complete tasks within the castle. Portrait of Ruin doesn't break the Metroidvania mold, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Mechanically, you could compare this to a polished Julius mode from Dawn of Sorrow, with you controlling both Jonathan and Charlotte by swapping on the fly, which has led to the two screaming each other's names when switching being forever ingrained in the brains of folks who actually played this game. Though they both have their own unique equipment and skill sets, they share a health pool, and you'll need to use both effectively to solve puzzles and optimize your combat skills, which includes the new dual crush attacks, where the two combine their powers to unleash a powerful special. But the tactical soul system was removed completely, a feature exclusive to Soma Cruz, which gave the team the ability to focus on items again, implemented as rewards for the quests provided by Wind. Portrait of Ruin was developed by the same Dawn of Sorrow team, with Iga returning as producer, but this time they involved some of the staff responsible for Circle of the Moon to shorten development time, leading to a team of 20 members building this game in around 16 months. Jonathan Morris was specifically selected as the game's hero because they wanted the whip gameplay to return as a celebration of Castlevania's 20th anniversary. But with a character who isn't directly a Belmont, they were able to provide plot reasons as to why the whip's power was limited. Even the title, Portrait of Ruin, strayed away from that usual musical reference, with the game now focusing on art, with Bronner's paintings providing a plot reason to leave the castle to explore more outdoorsy areas, which gave them the opportunity to come up with more creative bosses like Astarte, this Egyptian vampire living at the top of this pyramid, or Dagon, a fully underwater boss. But speaking of art, what happened to the art style here? Though Castlevania art veteran Ayami Kojima worked with Iga on the art for Curse of Darkness, Iga still had the opinion that a more anime art style would be appealing to younger audiences that formed the DS player base, despite fans' disappointment that Kojima's art style had been replaced. But for the first time in Castlevania history, there was multiplayer co-op mode, where players could use the local wireless or Wi-Fi capabilities of the DS to play boss rush mode together, or sell items online to other players. I remember I bought Portrait of Ruin like maybe 2 or 3 years after it originally came out, and I was so disappointed to see nobody in the multiplayer area. I was so lonely. But you wouldn't be missing out on much here. The highlight of the game is definitely the core campaign. So Jonathan and Charlotte will encounter the 3 vampires in charge, Bronner himself, and sisters Stella and Loretta. We find out that Bronner isn't actually trying to revive Dracula, mentioning he's failed too many times, which I'm glad someone is finally acknowledging this. But Bronner sets his eyes on thwarting death, since he seems to be doing death things and roaming around the castle trying to revive Dracula. So as Jonathan and Charlotte continue through the paintings, they'll defeat Stella in a battle, who drops her locket, and in it is a photo revealing her to be the daughter of Wind. And when Wind is questioned on this, he'll drop the bomb and confess that he is Eric Lecard, one of the heroes from Castlevania Bloodlines, and the twins are his children. It's kind of sad Jonathan doesn't know him. You'd think his dad would have kept in touch with Eric after all they've been through, but now he's dead. But his daughters might still be able to be saved. So they managed to track down a spell called Sanctuary that's able to dispel curses, including a vampire curse, which would have been a huge help to Leon to save Sarah way back when. I know her soul must be pissed in that vampire killer whip right now hearing all of this.
Are you serious?
This will lead to the climax where you take on both Stella and Loretta. You can defeat both of them here and get the bad ending where Bronner swoops in and saves them and flees the castle, while Eric fades away, concerned about his 2 daughters, while Jonathan and Charlotte are like, I wonder what that meant. Beats me. Let's go find them and kill them. But if you use Sanctuary in the fight, Charlotte manages to cure the sisters, and together they perform a ritual that allows Jonathan to use the vampire killer's full power. But first, the ritual requires Jonathan to fight the whip's memory, which is a full-on boss battle with Richter Belmont, the last Belmont owner of the whip. With all this in place, they can take on Bronner, who's now desperate. Not sure how fans feel about the painting theme in this game as a whole, but I love how creative this boss battle is with him in the end. It's a breath of fresh air compared to the same Dracula fight over and over again. Wait, what do you mean Death kills Bronner and revives Dracula using a painting of the throne room? Yeah, I feel like this painting was the only way they could get around the whole revived every century rule. So Jonathan and Charlotte will need to take on the combined forces of both Death and Dracula. And if that's not enough, Death lets Dracula absorb his power. This is kind of insane when you think about it. Jonathan and Charlotte have me questioning the Castlevania power tier list here. Look at this gross move where he has his claws close in on both of them on screen. I know I criticized Dracula as being the end boss, but this is a great final boss fight, I won't lie. Despite the intense battle, the two are triumphant, putting an end to another long night, as Dracula fades away again and the castle is destroyed. With Stella and Loretta saved, Eric can now rest in peace. And beating the game unlocks some cool extras like Sisters mode that allows you to play as Stella and Loretta, which serves as the prologue to the story to shed some light on how they became vampires in the first place. There's also a Richter mode where you can play the main story as Richter and Maria from Rondo of Blood. And how could I forget Old Axe Armor mode returning from Symphony of the Night? I think Portrait of Ruin is a phenomenal Castlevania game, and this was the one that had me jump back into the series many years ago. Another strong Metroidvania title for the series and an effective follow-up to Dawn of Sorrow. And you know, I find myself going back to listen to this soundtrack often when I'm trying to write scripts, and I was surprised to find out Michiru Yamane brought on video game composer veteran Yuzo Koshiro to help compose this soundtrack. Known for his work on Streets of Rage, the East series, Etrian Odyssey, Shenmue, the list goes on. So 2 years later, there would be yet another Castlevania game created for the Nintendo DS. But I have to take a second to say that the output on this series from the jump is crazy. By 2008, there would have been more Castlevania games in existence than the amount of years that the series has been around. It's hard to tell if this was just an aggressive push by Konami to drain it of every cent it could produce, or Iga being ambitious in trying to make the series succeed. Which brings us to Castlevania Order of Ecclesia, the final game for the Nintendo DS, released in October of 2008. But before we continue, I just want to say thank you to all the new members. I will give you a shout out at the end of the video. And if you're enjoying this type of content, please consider joining my Patreon as a patron, or you can become a member here on YouTube. I appreciate all of the support, and thank you so much for watching. So we return back to the 1800s after Alucard has defeated Dracula in Symphony of the Night. After the days of Richter Belmont, the Belmont clan has vanished, and people in power start creating these organizations to research how Dracula can be stopped if he ever returns again. One of those organizations is the titular Order of Ecclesia, who's found a method that they're confident would stand up to Dracula if he ever came back. 3 magical glyphs based on Dracula's power that they call Dominus. And the glyphs represent anger, hatred, and agony, and require a human vessel to be imprinted upon. Which brings us to our protagonist, Shinoa, a member of the Order chosen by the org leader Barlow. Though her colleague Albus seems very pissed about this, mentioning that Barlow promised him that he'd be the bearer. So during the ritual, the glyphs are stolen by Albus and he just dips, which causes Shinoa to lose her emotions and memories. Weeks pass, with Shinoa basically having to relearn everything she knew as a member of the Order. Still, she goes after Albus, which brings her to Weigel Village, a doomed town where Albus kidnapped its villagers and imprisons them. So Shinoa goes on this journey to save the villagers and retrieve the Dominus glyphs. Order of Ecclesia was also developed by many of the same members of the Portrait of Ruin team. But the dual character system was done away with this time, and the entirety of the game stars Shinoa, who uses a combat system called the Glyph system. Shinoa will collect glyph symbols throughout the castle through challenges or by destroying enemies, and the player will be able to absorb and equip these and give her different abilities. But all of her abilities are managed by these glyphs, including the weapons that she'll use. And each time you use the glyph, it drains some of her mana, which recovers over time. But Shinoa has 3 slots where they can be equipped. So with over 100 different glyphs, there are a lot of similarities to the tactical soul system used by Soma, which provides the player with several different playstyles. Not only that, she can meld glyphs together with a special attack called Glyph Union, providing even more offensive combinations that can be used to the player's advantage. Order of Ecclesia does something really interesting though. It doesn't take place all in one castle or area. Weigel Village is the hub, but Shinoa will be traveling around unique areas which are served in bite-sized Metroidvania formats. And throughout the game, Shinoa will be rescuing villagers who provide quests that she can complete for rewards. You've probably also noticed that the art style for this game is different too, compared to Portrait of Ruin and Dawn of Sorrow. So apparently Iga got the message on this and moved away from the anime art style to something that I think is incredibly beautiful. Shinoa has such an amazing design, which seems to take inspiration from Kojima's art style, but she wasn't responsible for this time. It was Masaki Hiroka, a young artist who Iga chose to be in charge of design. I'd even argue this game has some of the best sprite work in this series. Like this animation of Shinoa absorbing glyphs by lifting her hair and absorbing it into her back is just mwah. And then there's Shinoa herself, a proper female protagonist in the series, and on top of that, a woman with no ties to the Belmonts, Belnades, or Draculas of the world. As for why a female protagonist was chosen, I think that is the most frequently asked question I get these days. I guess there's a stigma that female characters get killed off easily or quickly. To be honest, it was a reaction to fans. They're the ones who have been requesting a female lead. Another reason is that we came up with the storyline first, and I felt that a female character fit with the storyline a lot better than a male character. The third reason is that I really liked the rendering that the artist did of a female character and decided to go with it. So I guess not much thought went into that decision. But rumor has it, Iga based Shinoa off of his own wife, which I've seen mentioned in forums, but I wasn't able to track down the actual quote, so take that with a grain of salt. Regardless, this game felt like a fresh start, and among the 3DS titles, seems to be the most no-nonsense with focus on that core Metroidvania gameplay, along with a sprinkle of traditional Castlevania action-style levels. So Shinoa is going around saving villagers, who apparently Albus has been capturing to perform experiments on. But when she tracks him down, he strangely starts returning glyphs from the Dominus to her. And when she has 2 in her possession, it's revealed that Albus has been possessed by the final one, and he's been giving her the glyphs to learn the absorption technique that she's been using. So by this stage of the game, you'll need to have saved all the villagers to get the true ending. Otherwise, you'll fight Albus to the death and then complete the ritual at the Order of Ecclesia, which results in Shinoa losing her life. But that doesn't sound fun. So you've saved all of the villagers, and during your fight with Albus, Shinoa will absorb the final Dominus glyph. And she realizes while fusing with his conscious that Albus has been trying to find a way to defeat Dracula without Shinoa using the Dominus in the first place, which, as we saw from the bad ending, cost her life. And all these villagers he's been experimenting on are, drumroll, descendants of the Belmont clan. So Albus had good intentions the whole time, sorta. But he'd hoped that their Belmont blood would provide some way to control Dominus, since he reveals that Dominus is just the essence of Dracula himself. But there's a true orchestrator behind the scenes. The leader of the Order of Ecclesia himself, Barlow, who sacrificed Shinoa's memories and emotions to control Dominus himself. So Barlow has some explaining to do, and Shinoa marches back over to confront him, where it's revealed this whole Dominus thing was a farce. This whole time, Barlow has been meaning to sacrifice Shinoa to bring Dracula back to life, but after being cornered and defeated by her, he just offers himself to Dracula instead. So yes, Dracula returns along with all of his usual minions, including Death, leading to the finale of Shinoa infiltrating his castle, the biggest available map in the game. But she'll reach the castle keep and meet Dracula. And I find it funny, after he's been so aggressive to everyone else, Alucard being the exception, he's here trying to rizz her up. But at the end of their battle, Shinoa uses the Dominus to strike him down, knowing it was at the cost of her life. But Albus, as a spirit living within her, chooses to step forward as the sacrifice for Dominus. With the worst over, Shinoa smiles for Albus one last time, showing her emotions have fully returned to her. And as the castle is destroyed again, Shinoa will escape, and all record of Ecclesia will be fully wiped out. I really love this game, and I think it's my favorite of the 3DS games. Castlevania had such a solid run on this platform, but unfortunately the sales numbers were proving to be pretty modest overall. And I'll admit, even though I bought Portrait of Ruin, I had no clue Order of Ecclesia existed until years later. I was someone who watched all the E3 coverage religiously, spending my mornings on Kotaku and game trailers, and for some reason I glossed over so much of the Castlevania series during this time period. And ultimately, Order of Ecclesia was the weakest of the 3 sales-wise, but if you enjoyed the coverage of Dawn of Sorrow, Portrait of Ruin, and Order of Ecclesia, you can play these games for yourself with the Castlevania Dominus collection. So seriously, if you want more Castlevania games like this, go support those collections and vote with your wallet. You don't have to if you don't like these games, but you get my point.
They're huge. These things only get in the way.
So Order of Ecclesia would be Koji Igarashi's final mainline Castlevania game. It was after this title where Castlevania started to shift. Sales weren't impressing Konami, and it felt like the market was flooded with these games. This would ultimately lead to a full reboot of the series, but before that happened, there were 2 major spin-off titles. Let's start with 2008's Castlevania Judgment. Developed exclusively for the Nintendo Wii, this was one of the strangest ideas to come out of the Castlevania series. Castlevania Judgment was a full-on fighting game. Did you ever wonder what would happen if all the characters from Castlevania came together to beat the shit out of one another? No? Well, take it anyway. Funny enough, I didn't know about Order of Ecclesia, but I was fully aware of this game, and almost bought it myself. So within this universe, the Time Reaper, a being from millennia in the future, travels back in time to kill Dracula and erase him from history entirely. But a man named Aeon catches on to this plan, and pulls champions from different eras of Castlevania's timeline to find the one capable of destroying the Time Reaper. And here's the funny part. It's implied that the Time Reaper was sent by his master, Galamoth. That name is a deep cut. Galamoth is actually the dinosaur-like villain from a Japanese exclusive Castlevania spin-off called Kid Dracula from 1990. I didn't fully cover that game in this series, but this is a neat little Easter egg, implying that because of the events of that goofy parody game, Galamoth is now trying to have Dracula erased from history entirely. So Judgment had 14 playable characters, each with their own stories, many who I've discussed ad nauseum, like series staples Alucard, Simon Belmont, Trevor Belmont, Sifo Belnades, and even Shanoa makes an appearance here. But there are characters you don't see too often or that deserve more of the spotlight, including Grant Dynasty from Castlevania 3, Carmilla, and even Cornell from Legacy of Darkness. Each of these characters have their own moveset and weapons to work with, of course, and will fight in these 3D arenas that you're able to fully run around, and you can pick up items and sub-weapons that can then be used in combat. As wacky as this seems, there's something charming about this game until you realize it falls victim to the motion control pandemic that was going on at that time. You'll need to swing the Wii remote to attack, and by holding down different buttons on the remote while you swing, the combos will change. Of course, you could use the classic and GameCube controllers to fight as well. But the story campaigns here are nothing to write home about, because most of the characters don't feel like how you'd envision them, having bastardized personalities.
They're huge. These things only get in the way.
Even the vampires are bigger than mine!
This is very much a product of the 2000s. Even if it doesn't feel cohesive to the rest of the series, Koji Igarashi produced this one as well, recruiting fighting game developers Aiding to work on the title. And Aiding was mostly known for the Bloody Roar series, but also was contracted several times to work on budget anime fighting games like the Naruto Class of Ninja series. So this was definitely their wheelhouse, but the aesthetic was so not Castlevania that that's where you'll see most of the criticism. And the lead artist for Judgment was Takeshi Obata, creator of Death Note, which is why Simon looks exactly like Light Yagami. Yeah, I have no idea why they thought this would pass as Simon, but he redesigned every character included in the game. Early on, when Iga was asked about the title, his response was, "I guess some fans may worry about the game quality, but I'm confident that we can achieve a very high quality game." I think that fans will see that it stays true to the Castlevania series. Even though this is a fighting game, I can guarantee that it will be fun. I guess from a general standpoint, he was wrong about all these things, because the game ended up averaging a 49 on Metacritic. The biggest criticisms being the character design, disorienting camera control, awful control scheme, and unbalanced characters. Though IGN said this was a deep, fun fighter, so which one is it? Luke Plunkett, who was the editor for Kotaku at the time, was shown the game at 2008's Tokyo Game Show, and said, quote, "I walked away from the show feeling bad. Bad for Castlevania fans at least. There's just nothing right about this game. Nothing." So as you'd imagine, sales for Castlevania Judgment were abysmal, with reports of only 3,700 copies being sold in Japan. I can't track down accurate North American numbers, but I imagine it wasn't much better here. So sales-wise, 2008 was not a good year for Castlevania. But Iga already had the next generation of the series kicked off, with this trailer revealed at Tokyo Game Show 2008. This would have been a game for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Though only 30 seconds, it shows what looks to be Alucard, and that's it. So table this trailer for now, we'll get back to it later. So instead of this next-gen game, we got a little title called Castlevania Harmony of Despair, released for the 360 in August 2010, and for the PlayStation 3 in September 2011. Disclaimer, I am very biased when it comes to Harmony of Despair. This is my second favorite Castlevania game of all time, so bear in mind I might gush through this whole part, but shout out to all my other Harmony of Despair fans out there, I got you. What if you could play as several major characters within the Castlevania series, complete with their playstyles from the original games, in an arcade-style setting that gives you a huge portion of a castle map and gives you a set amount of time to find good equipment, items, get all the way to the boss, and kill it? And what if I told you it's multiplayer co-op, so you and your friends can tackle this all at the same time? That is Harmony of Despair. No story to speak of here, just pick a character, a stage, jump in, and go to town and try to defeat that boss. On release, this game had 5 playable characters: Soma, Alucard, Jonathan, Shanoa, and Charlotte, all with their unique gameplay styles brought into this game. So for example, Soma will occasionally absorb souls from monsters defeated in each run, and the more of those souls he gets, the stronger the ability that comes with it, and all of that will carry over into future runs. Alucard will mainly be trying to find the best equipment and weapons to use in battle, and so on. So it goes beyond just selecting a character. You're gonna have to sink time into building that character through multiple runs of each stage. And each of these stages has just the right amount of difficulty for every playthrough to feel satisfying. But once you start getting better, you can switch the stages to hard mode, where you start getting that real gear. Initially, there were 6 stages available, each pulling levels and bosses from different games in the series, with the 6th one being the final showdown with Dracula. But they supported this game long-term with DLC, like 5 additional stages, including the entire map from the original Castlevania. additional characters like Julius and Richter, Maria and Yoko, and even an 8-bit Simon Belmont. And if the music tracks in these levels weren't good enough for you, there were music packs as well, and you can assign any song to any level. This game came out when I was in college, and I sunk hours into it with my roommates. I honestly don't know if there are any other games out there that scratch the itch this one does, because we'd select characters and try our best to optimize them with the best skills and equipment, and of course boss drops, like the Miser Ring, a ring that boosted your attack damage based on how much money you have, which comes in handy once you've done so many runs that money isn't an issue anymore. And the best weapon in the game was the Valmanway, only dropped by Dracula or Astarte or Legion in hard mode with a 0.7% chance drop rate. So for this game I was a Soma main, so I had to factor in killing certain enemies for the best souls and getting as many as I could to fully level up that ability. Like the Yorick soul. Fully level up this soul and you can toss its head at any time and then stomp on it to use it to skip entire areas of the level to get to the boss faster. Unfortunately, this game never crossed over to future consoles and is stuck on the PS3 and 360. Minor correction from future me, you can actually access this game on Xbox One since it's backwards compatible. I still have it saved on my old PS3 and crazy enough the servers are still up, but good luck finding anyone to play with in 2025. But if Konami is going on an apology tour for their franchises right now, I would love for them just to make this available for current consoles and PC. I'm a little disappointed that the critics didn't see what I saw in this game. Mostly averaging 7s, with most of them saying it doesn't feel like a Castlevania game, with its priorities on finding loot and team-based mechanics. But I don't know, maybe there was Castlevania fatigue at this point in the series. But Harmony of Despair would be Koji Igarashi's swan song before there would be a major shift for Castlevania. A sudden move from Konami that would lead to its most successful game in the series, and the sudden long rest for Castlevania.
Dark times. Need a dark hero.
It's the year 1047, the end of days, as creatures of the night flood the earth. Death is rampant, and it seems the heavens have turned their back on mankind. Enter Gabriel Belmont, a member of the Brotherhood of Light, an order of holy knights who defend the world from these demonic creatures. Equipped with his combat cross and iron chain, he stands alone against the lycanthropes and goblins of the world and titans, but he's also on a mission to find the source of these creatures and get revenge for the death of his wife, Marie, her soul trapped in limbo for eternity. Welcome to Castlevania Lords of Shadow, released for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in October of 2010. And the moment you turn on this game, there's a stark contrast in aesthetic to all the games that came before it. You're whisked into this world by a narrator setting the tone as if reading the pages of a book.
Mankind faces ruin and despair. The world is changing.
Wait a minute, is that
Gouts of blood that was not so before.
Patrick Stewart?
Ignorant like sheep to the slaughter.
So they brought in Patrick Stewart to serve as the narrator and a character within the game that we'll get to shortly. So he'll do these narrations in between levels, but anytime he finished speaking, I can't help but think back to those read-along audiobooks that I used to listen to as a kid.
You'll know it's time to turn the page when you hear the chimes ring like this.
Into oblivion.
And after a series of tutorials to give you an understanding of the combat, immediately it feels familiar, but not Castlevania familiar. Many compared this game to God of War, and as I played through it, I tried to give it the benefit of the doubt, but there are indeed many similarities to God of War. Down to the combat style, weapon choice, the types of skills you purchase, the life and weapon upgrades you get, the more gritty grabs and finishers, but despite that, it copies it well. The combat is fluid and fun, and you're thrown right into how flashy it is from the first few minutes. And for the sake of comparing what came before, it feels like this game does take a lot of inspiration from Lament of Innocence as well. Though you'll also notice that Lords of Shadow goes back to the level-based action stages as the story progresses, and initially, this kind of felt more like a side story to Lord of the Rings for me. This is the first hour of the game. Wargs, goblins, runes, and fairies.
I hear you seek the Guardian of the Lake. I will take you to him, but we must be quick. Climb onto my back. Hurry!
What is this? What is happening here? Before you start furiously typing, that means you, James, and you, Jonathan. I know Castlevania has had wargs and fairies before, but you have to admit it's not like this. This feels straight up Tolkien. But as you play through these action stages, there are actually quite a few branching paths, so if you take different paths, you might miss upgrades or little collectibles along the way that you'll have to backtrack and play the stage again if you want to collect. Later on, as you get upgrades to your weapon, you're going to have to return to previous levels and use that upgrade to access more items. And then there's the music, which is less gothic and more cinematic, and leans more into that fantasy, ethereal vibe. It's fitting, it's epic, and it really matches the setting and change that they were going for here. I love me some Castlevania music composed by Yamane, but I guarantee it wouldn't have fit this setting very well. So I'll be honest, this is another Castlevania game I skipped when it first came out, because I think the change in both aesthetic and gameplay was a little jarring to me at the time. I was a sucker for the Metroidvania titles, so I wasn't exactly boycotting it, but I was just kind of saving my money at the time and I never got back around to it, until now. And I will say I was pleasantly surprised, especially when this game is now 15 years old as of this month.
I just feel old.
It holds up decently. Combat is based mainly around Gabriel's cross with the retractable chain whip, with you mostly combining square and triangle to mix and match combos that cover both close range and distance attacks. You'll have sub-weapons like daggers that can be thrown to make werewolves explode. This is pretty cool. And added to this game is a grab move where you'll hold an enemy and then have to time a button press to damage it, or else the enemy will break free. And this actually comes in handy later when you're trying to grab goblins so they can drop bombs so you can throw at obstacles. I thought that part was a little annoying. Later on, you'll even get access to light and dark magic, which makes me wonder if this was a reference to Iga's original intention to have that light and dark alignment system for Alucard in Symphony of the Night. And being a product of the 2010s, there are several QuickTime events where you'll have to time your button presses to avoid the consequences. Like the final finisher on this boss, only for it to turn around and kill me after that long fight. This had me salty, I'm not gonna lie. But even though this seems like quite the departure from the Castlevania series, there were moments where I got flashbacks to Lament of Innocence and Super Castlevania 4, like Gabriel using the iron chain to swing from platform to platform. But to fully get the most out of this new direction, you'll need to open up Gabriel's travel book and read some of the additional lore. Imagine my surprise when I wanted to learn more about Gabriel's weapons and found that the iron chain was created by none other than Rinaldo Gandolfi.
Oh, that.
A reference to the alchemist that helps Leon Belmont take down the vampire Walter Bernhardt in Lament of Innocence. Seriously, if you haven't watched my last video on that, go back and check it out. Unless you played Lament of Innocence, then ignore me. In this travel book, you can also read up on characters you encounter throughout the game. Gabriel himself is revealed to be an orphan taken in by the Brotherhood of Light, but overall his lineage remains a mystery, with some believing he may have come from the Kronkovist family. Another callback to Lament of Innocence and the family of Matthias Kronkovist, who would go on to betray Leon Belmont and become Dracula himself. So yes, there's going to be a ton of Lament of Innocence references within the course of this game. Anyway, once the major tutorials are out of the way, you control Gabriel on his quest to head to the Lake of Oblivion, a place where the living can talk to the dead. The Brotherhood of Light sends him on this mission, so once Gabriel arrives, he's guided there by Pan, and he speaks to his deceased wife Marie, who tells him that the Lords of Shadow's power will save the world. So during his journey, Gabriel meets Zobek, played by Patrick Stewart.
I am Zobek, a warrior of your Brotherhood. Pan and I are old acquaintances.
A veteran member of the Brotherhood who tells Gabriel that there's a secret prophecy that a pure-hearted warrior who claims the Lord of Shadow's power will overcome evil. And Gabriel's all like, I bet that's me. So to claim that power, he ventures into the lands of the Dark Lord to fulfill the prophecy and unite the heavens with the world again so that he can bring Marie back to life. In the land of the Lycans, he meets a mute girl named Claudia.
Wait!
Who's protected by a golem, and she can telepathically communicate with him and read minds. And so Claudia chooses to help Gabriel with his quest. But while resting, Gabriel has this dream that he stabs and kills Claudia. Oops, he actually stabbed and killed Claudia.
Oh shit!
So her golem is rightfully pissed, and that leads to a boss fight. And once it's defeated, the golem's gauntlet forces itself on Gabriel, who can only bury Claudia at this point. But what happened with Gabriel here? I guess we'll just forget this ever happened and move on. And so deeper in the land of Lycans, he runs into a familiar face along the way. Cornell from Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. Well, it's not actually him, but the name is a callback to that character. But Cornell is also a werewolf in this game and is one of the Lords of Shadow. And after defeating Cornell, he collects a shard of what's called the God Mask, a mask that has the power to revive the dead. This will be important later. Gabriel will then venture to the castle of another familiar face, Carmilla, our resident vampire queen. And apparently this castle formerly belonged to a wealthy family known as the Bernhardt family, before they were ousted by Carmilla, a reference to Walter Bernhardt, the main antagonist of Lament of Innocence. And in this castle, Gabriel will meet a young vampire named Laura, a reference to the woman accompanying Carmilla in her Rondo of Blood boss fight. And though initially she wants to kill Gabriel, Laura will stop short, envying the love between Gabriel and Marie. And that leads to Gabriel's confrontation with Carmilla, and once defeated, he gets the second piece of the God Mask. Cornell and Carmilla were once two of the founding members of the Brotherhood of Light, warriors who fought off Satan's forces for gods long ago, and were transformed into greater spirits in the heavens. So by leaving behind their dark sides in the human world, those became known as Lords of Shadow. And I'm barely scratching the surface on the lore here, because in the Bernhard Castle, Frederick von Frankenstein once lived there and conducted experiments into artificial life in his laboratory, which you see as you explore the castle. And apparently Carmilla didn't like this when she existed as a normal person, so her Dark Lord version stays behind and tortures Frankenstein on a daily basis. It's pretty cool. If you really dive into the things in this game, it's rather intricate. So with 2 shards down, there's only 1 left to go. And as Gabriel goes off to get that last piece of the mask, let's answer the question as to why this title feels so different. This would be the first Castlevania game since Circle of the Moon to not be directed by Iga, which brings us back to that next-gen Castlevania trailer with Alucard from earlier. This was Iga's vision for the next generation of Castlevania, but many of the Castlevania games that came before it sold poorly, and Konami had to take a step back to decide the future of the series. So internally, there were many prototypes that were circling to compete for what would be the next Castlevania, Iga's next-gen project being one of those prototypes. So with the rise of the PS3 and Xbox 360, this was a moment where Western developers were dominating the cultural spotlight. Gritty cinematic realism was the new blockbuster formula. Japanese publishers hadn't vanished, in fact Nintendo was doing pretty well still, but Japanese publishers weren't leading the conversation like they once were. Action-heavy shooters were everywhere, and the industry seemed obsessed with Western trends. And at that time, Konami started to become a shadow of their former selves. Extreme. So alongside Iga's pitch for the next Castlevania installment was another game in the works named Lords of Shadow. Created by Spanish studio Mercury Steam, the studio that would go on to develop Metroid Samus Returns and the recent Switch hit Metroid Dread. And as they continued development on Lords of Shadow, Konami didn't seem confident because after initially greenlighting it as a Castlevania game, they then told the team to develop it as an original intellectual property instead, and then even asked them to stop their work on it during early stages. But Konami's producer of the game, David Cox, would stand firm and prove to their senior management in Japan that Lords of Shadow had potential. So to make sure the game had stronger backing, they offered world-renowned director Hideo Kojima to join the production staff, and at that point gave Mercury Steam devs more freedom with the development of the game. Meanwhile, Iga's project wasn't going very well, and after locking in Lords of Shadow as the next installment, Konami would cancel his project. And in 2011, Iga would be moved to Konami's social division, with his focus being solely on mobile game development. So similarly to the fate of the creator of Castlevania, Hitoshi Akamatsu, all those years before, poor sales numbers resulted in Iga's demotion in everything but name, where he'd go on to produce low-budget titles like anime waifu Gradius clone Otomedius Excellent, and Xbox Kinect exclusive title Lead Me's. I wouldn't be surprised if you never heard of these games. So as you'd imagine, he wasn't happy and he'd end up leaving Konami in 2014 to pursue different ventures. And I have to wonder what Iga would have come up with if Konami gave him the same backing and budget they provided Lords of Shadow. But we'll check back on him later, as that wasn't the end to his career in the game industry. So we head back to the Lords of Shadow team, and their first idea? A full remake of the original Castlevania, with Simon Belmont returning as the lead. But then they felt it was a better idea to just reboot the franchise to make it more accessible to new audiences. That's when they landed on Gabriel, his original concept returning to that classic barbarian look, before Kojima advised for creating a more relatable character. Scottish actor Robert Carlyle, known for his roles in Trainspotting and The Full Monty, was chosen to voice Gabriel to fit that relatable aspect of the character. They actually went after Gerard Butler for this part initially, but because he was unavailable, they had to switch gears. I would have loved to have seen that version of the game. I wonder how that would have come out. So with the new team in charge, the music would shift as well, with a brand new composer, Oscar Araujo, who had a 120-piece orchestra at his disposal. This would lead Araujo to be nominated and awarded Best Original Score for a video game by the International Film Music Critics Association. There's definitely some beautiful music in this game, and as I said before, it really fits the setting, the more fantastical version of it, and that tragic story. And going back to something I said in the last video, that I believe Konami was terrible at marketing Castlevania as a whole. And I speculate that the games gained popularity because of the talented people that passionately worked on it over the years. But their marketing approach felt different for Lords of Shadow. I remember this was everywhere, and Konami put their full strength behind trying to get this reboot to succeed. And that attempt was successful because to date, Lords of Shadow is still the highest selling Castlevania game of all time, shipping 1 million copies in North America and Europe within the first month, and scoring an average of 8s and 9s by the critics. So with Lords of Shadow being a commercial success, Konami of course moved forward with this rebooted world for future titles. But let's get back to Gabriel and close out this story. So Gabriel travels to the land of necromancers to retrieve the last piece of the mask, and does so after defeating the necromancer. But in a twist, the Lord of Necromancers turns out to be, shocker, Zobek. Yes, Patrick Stewart is the Grand Orchestrator donned with this devil mask on his face.
You are the Lord of the Necromancers. The final Lord.
Now you begin to understand. Yes, Gabriel. It was I who cast the spell that separated the earth from the heavens.
The one who sent Gabriel to kill the Lords of Shadow because he was tired of the balance of power between the three of them. So he consulted with the evil forces of hell to cast the spell that separated the earth from the heavens, causing all this crazy stuff to happen in the first place. But the true twist is revealed tragically to Gabriel.
Poor little Claudia. Such a sweet thing.
No.
You have exceeded even my wildest expectations, killing and butchering your way to victory. There is a terrible darkness in you, my friend. As you slept, I was able to influence you with this mask. Yes, Gabriel, now you finally understand. It was you who murdered your wife.
Zobek has been using the devil mask on him, which forced him to kill Claudia, and even worse, his wife Marie. Gabriel was being played from the start, caught up in a battle between God and the devil. Speaking of the devil, Satan pops up, and as he murders Zobek, it's revealed that he was the actual mastermind all along, the one that taught Zobek the dark arts in the first place. So yes, Castlevania Lords of Shadow ends with a boss fight with Satan, voiced by Jason Isaacs.
You monkeys don't deserve redemption.
So using all the power that he's gained from his journey, Gabriel defeats Satan and releases the spell that has been trapping souls in limbo this whole time. Now is Gabriel's chance to free Marie, but he's faced with yet another harsh truth. The God Mask was never meant to bring back the dead.
It is too late for me, my love. I cannot come back.
No. I love you, Marie. I love you. Forgive me.
It's a tragic story of a man manipulated by the evil forces around him, one tricked into doing their bidding for a silly war between God and Satan. And it ends on this sour note, where Gabriel now must live the rest of his life without Marie. But there's this epilogue scene where we find out Zobek is alive? Is that Gabriel?
Don't you dare call me that. Saint Dracul.
Oh my gosh, a Belmont is Dracula. Is this modern times? What's going on? So this cryptic epilogue was clearly sequel bait and the first hint that this Lords of Shadow world would become something more. There was DLC released later for the game to fill in some of the gaps between the end of the game and the epilogue. Known as Reverie and Resurrection, it details Gabriel's adventure to take down an incredibly powerful demon named the Forgotten One, who the Brotherhood has locked up deep in the Bernhardt Castle. The creature is also a direct reference to an optional boss called the Forgotten One in Lament of Innocence, who is also locked up deep within Walter Bernhardt's castle. So the DLC has Laura call on Gabriel to help deal with this threat, but to enter the Forgotten One's dark domain, Gabriel needs to become a dark being. So Laura offers all her blood to him so that he may pass, and by drinking her blood, it explains how he becomes a creature of the night. And so he descends into the underworld and takes on the Forgotten One, and by slaying him, claims his power. Now corrupted, Gabriel destroys his vampire killer, and goes back into the world, now fully embracing his power as Dracula. I think Lords of Shadow is a great game. Not a perfect one, but I appreciate Konami trying something new. Before I make my next point, the writing is phenomenal, and there's a ton of lore that I didn't touch on in this video that is there just waiting for you to explore. However, outside of the Shin Megami Tensei series, I tend to be a little off-put by literal conflicts between God and Satan in games. It lacks a degree of creativity for me, and Diving too much into the Lords of Shadow world, it feels less Castlevania that way. I know the original lore is Dracula making a pact with the devil, but it felt more otherworldly in that sense, like a looming otherworldly threat that never really showed itself, and that fits the setting a bit better than them actually being there. But with that said, I'd say this game is a refreshing window back into the 2010s, and though it was doing something new, I felt it was a game developed with care and respect for the overall Castlevania series. So with all of this positive reception, by 2012, Mercury Steam would already have another Castlevania project in the chamber. Castlevania Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate for the Nintendo 3DS, released in March of 2013. And this title served as a direct sequel to Lords of Shadow. The game definitely feels like an interim game, and it's positioned in this 2.5D format, which clearly served as the foundation for Samus Returns. But Mirror of Fate carries the essence of Lords of Shadow while mixing in several elements from the Metroidvania era of Castlevania, complete with a much larger map and backtrackable areas. So we'll run through the revelations of the plot real quick, because it's actually important to the sequel. The game opens up with a short prologue where we learn prior to Lords of Shadow that Gabriel and Marie had a child. One she gave birth to while Gabriel was away on duty. The child's name is Trevor. But the Order takes him away when they prophesize that Trevor is the only one that can stop his father once he turns to darkness. So time passes and the game opens from the perspective of Simon Belmont, son of Trevor, whose mother Sypha is killed by Dracula and his forces. I hate this game already. So Simon flees to the mountains where the people living there train him in the way of the whip, and once old enough, he sets out to infiltrate Dracula's castle and kill Dracula. So again we have a quest for vengeance, and as Simon explores the castle, he meets this lost soul who expresses interest in his medallion. But he's tasked by that soul to get a copy of the combat cross that Gabriel once wielded, while frequently being saved by a man with white hair. I wonder who this could be. But after his trials and tribulations through the castle,
you've missed out on so much pleasure.
I'm fighting for my life!
And defeating the succubus, Simon will face Dracula. And though shrouded in mystery, it's clear this is Gabriel, who has now made the Bernhard Castle his own after the events of the original game. And before he and Simon fight, the white-haired man joins them, and it's revealed that he is Alucard. Fade to black. So yes, Simon's story is just one part of 3 unique stories in Mirror of Fate. So with that reveal, we go to Act 2, where you play as Alucard. Much like other parts of the Lords of Shadow world, Alucard's backstory is very different. He awakens in this tomb and learns from the same lost soul that he is now a vampire because of Dracula. Alucard also has amnesia, so he goes on this quest to slay Dracula, which brings us back to this moment. Alucard and Simon fight Dracula together and manage to get him on the ropes. And as Alucard restrains him, Simon deals the killing blow. But seeing the way he dissolves, Alucard knows something's not right, and he's probably not fully dead. But he tells Simon that the medallion in his possession is a shard of the titular Mirror of Fate, an artifact capable of revealing somebody's fate or truths of the world, sometimes to their detriment. And we fade to black once more after Simon asks Alucard for his true identity. The final story is from the perspective of Trevor, son of Gabriel, and we rewind a bit to uncover his fate. After being whisked away as a baby by the Order, he's raised in secret, and as time passed, now having a wife and child of his own, he learns that his father Gabriel is now Dracula. So not knowing Gabriel was under the influence of Zobek when he murdered Marie, Trevor seeks out Dracula to get revenge. He gives his son Simon his medallion before setting off to the castle. Once he arrives, he starts to learn how to control light and dark magic, similarly to how Gabriel handled it in Lords of Shadow. So Trevor confronts Dracula and gains the advantage with his magic, but in the skirmish, Trevor is impaled with his own cross.
I pity you, Father. Father.
Dracula doesn't believe this at first until he gets a look at Trevor through the Mirror of Fate. And he's shocked by this and desperately tries to save him by turning him into a vampire, but he's too late. In his grief, Dracula builds a coffin for Trevor before engraving it with the name Alucard. So yeah, in this world, Dracula is a Belmont, but first gave birth to a son, Trevor, who then conceived Simon before turning into a vampire by Dracula and then taking on the name Alucard. I don't know, this just felt like a way to bring in Castlevania fan favorites all in one go, to the point where they combine Trevor and Alucard into a single person. I'm not really a fan of this after the first game started off so strong lore-wise. So in the end, after Dracula's defeat, Alucard finds the stake from Gabriel's broken vampire killer, and flees the castle as Simon watches it crumble. I appreciate this callback here. Clearly this was mostly a setup to the next big game, but Mirror of Fate is a pretty forgettable title in the grand scheme of Castlevania. Regardless, I appreciate them going back to the Metroidvania formula. And even though it got lower reviews than Lords of Shadow, I think this still has some quality. You can tell it wasn't phoned in, and they have an appreciation for the Ecclesia style of games.
1 million troops. Wow. Love you guys.
And so we've reached the latest game in the Castlevania series at the time of this video, Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2, released for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 a whopping 11 years ago.
I just feel old.
And the game took a different direction by having the player take control of Gabriel once again, but this time as Dracula. And it opens with his castle being raided by the Brotherhood, where you'll get your bearings with his full Dracula powers. His combat cross / vampire killer has been replaced with the Shadow Whip, but it works pretty much like the combat cross. You'll be using a mixture of close range attacks and ones with distance, but new to this game, Dracula can suck the blood of enemies, which powers his Void and Chaos weapons, with the Void Sword allowing him to regain health while hitting enemies, and the Chaos Claws that are more powerful and break through defenses. So Dracula will lay siege to the Brotherhood, declaring himself God's chosen one, and flexes by using this cross that this last paladin is preying on.
I was like you once, but your God showed me another path.
Say what you will about this game, this intro is phenomenal. The prologue ends with Alucard confronting Dracula. Then, an entire 1,000 years pass. Gabriel awakens in modern day, in a forgotten cathedral now frail and half skeletal, finally picking up where the epilogue of the original game left off. So his powers are gone, which is a good excuse to start the game with no upgrades. But we see that at some point, Dracula had this conversation with his old friend Zobek, who warns him that Satan's acolytes are preparing for Satan's return. Zobek asks for his assistance and he'll free Gabriel of his cursed immortality. And it's interesting having a Dracula running around in modern day times. I feel Aria and Dawn of Sorrow tried this, but never really got into the futuristic modern aspects of it all. So this shot of this feeble Dracula stepping into a modern street is pretty interesting. It reminds me of Hocus Pocus, actually.
Tell me, friend, what is this contraption?
I call it a bus.
This place is called Castlevania City. I'm not joking. A city built on the remains of Dracula's castle. So he staggers into the streets, haunted by visions of a young Trevor. But modern times aren't fun for Dracula because he gets mugged by a demon in the alleyway.
Get him up, let him get up, let him get up, let him get up.
Forcing Zobek's bodyguard to save him, murders an innocent family to gain his health back, and then is forced to help Zobek, who is now a clean-cut businessman, so he can gain access to the vampire killer so that he can end himself. So throughout the game, Gabriel will be hunting down Satan's 3 acolytes while battling off the Brotherhood of Light and forces of Satan. But Lords of Shadow 2 returns to that stage-by-stage action-style gameplay much like the first. The constant back and forth between modern corporate skyscrapers and these ancient Gothic ruins created a couple of problems that critics and fans pointed out. The major one is that the world is disjointed. The modern city is frequently criticized for being bland, linear, and relying on frustrating stealth sections where an all-powerful Dracula has to turn into a rat to sneak past guards. And many felt that the grandeur of the first game's environments were lost. And to top it off, the story didn't really hold up either, with Dracula reduced to Zobek's pawn throughout a majority of the game, all in a quest to end his own life. You finally have Dracula's powers at your disposal, and this is his goal. I think it's a valid criticism. And while also being developed by Mercury Steam, development of this title was labeled much more troubled this time around. In 2014, an anonymous employee would leak to gaming websites information on the chaos and the toxic environment at Mercury Steam. There was allegedly little communication between parts of the studio, which caused a 6-month delay during production and affected the consistency of the game. And by the time it was completed, 35 employees had been fired. That anonymous employee has said, quote, "The vast majority of this team is aware that the game we've done is a real piece of shit. That has nothing to do with the first one's quality and production values. Nobody is surprised by the low reviews we've got. If there's someone to blame here, that's Enric Alvarez, the co-founder of Mercury Steam and the director of Lords of Shadow. He is the person who has led a broken development based on his personal criteria. completely overlooking programmers, designers, and artists. Since the success of Lords of Shadow 1, his ego has grown to the point of not even daring to say hello when you meet him in the hallway. Most of the development team often found out features of the game through press news rather than from the studio's head. Unbelievable." End quote. And unfortunately, this wouldn't be the last time Mercury's team would be alleged to be a chaotic workspace, with reports arising again just a couple weeks ago of the unhealthy atmosphere by both current and former employees, complete with crunch time, cancelled vacations, 10-hour workdays as the new norm, and emotional pressure on all the developers themselves. So with Lords of Shadow 2 being famously lower in quality than its predecessor, it seems this type of environment didn't help the game during development. But we get back to our story.
Let's get on with it.
Gabriel's first target is Risa Volkova of the Biochemech Corporation.
What's she doing? My God, she's gone mad.
As Gabriel infiltrates the science district, he begins slipping between modern reality and his old castle, recovering powers like the Void Sword. And so at the end of this section, he'll defeat Risa, and Zobek takes her for interrogation. So throughout the game, Gabriel will be pulled into the past version of his castle, where he fights bosses of the past to retrieve new weapons and upgrades like the Chaos Claws. This past castle is one of the game's biggest narrative ambiguities, because it's never fully clear if it's literal time travel or a physical manifestation of Dracula's own fragmented memories and psyche. While there are a few theories on this in-game, it's not very fleshed out. Meanwhile, back in the present, a plague Risa was engineering has now infected humans, turning them into crazy monsters, which causes this apocalyptic event. And the plot so far makes me feel like I'm not talking about a Castlevania game anymore. And then at one point, Dracula meets and fights the leader of the Brotherhood of Light, which I'm amazed lasted for 1,000 years, but this leader is revealed to be Victor Belmont.
I'm Victor. Victor Belmont. Commander of the Brotherhood of Light. Protector of humanity. And the last of my illustrious bloodline.
Which may be a coincidence, but he has the same name as that time-traveling Belmont they were going to put in the cancelled Castlevania Resurrection. So hell yeah, a Belmont of old working with a Belmont of the new. Oh, he's dead. So after a ton of time travel shenanigans and Dracula saving these specters of Trevor and Marie in the past, and having this therapy session with the Mirror of Fate, the climax of the game does this big reveal. Robek's bodyguard is actually a disguised Alucard. The two had concocted a millennia-long plan for Dracula to feign death and lure out both Satan's acolytes and Zobek, who was revealed to be Death, which I'm not sure if anyone's surprised at this point. Then once they rid the world of all of them, they'd use the vampire killer to vanquish themselves. So yeah, Dracula and Alucard had an off-screen conversation, and I guess planned this after Simon defeated him at the end of Mirror of Fate. But all this leads up to the grand finale, where Dracula kills Zobek/Death, then teams up with Alucard to face this Leviathan, and then face Satan himself. And after a brutal battle, Dracula defeats the devil, and because of his little therapy session throughout the entire game, chooses to defy his destiny, with it implying that he chooses life with his son Alucard. This is great and all, but I need to know what everyday life was like for them after this. Did they go to Disney World together?
I have a lot of catching up to do with my dad.
Good throw, son.
But on a more serious note, I take some issue with this ending. While Gabriel started as a tragic character, he's committed many unforgivable sins since the moment he lost Marie. And though he was manipulated at first, he did succumb to darkness, murdering many innocent people, including his own son. And to just beat Death and Satan again to skip off into the sunset with his vampire offspring feels like it doesn't properly end his story. My guess here is that the writers were stuck, because he either beats Satan, gets the vampire killer and vanquishes himself, or sacrifices himself in battle against Death and Satan. One of these outcomes is unsatisfying, and the other is cliche, so I guess they were left with this. But either way, I won't discredit the underlying message. People can face the sins of their past, and people can continue living and build a new life for themselves. Dads can come back from the corner store after they're finally done buying cigarettes. But we're talking about a 1,000-year-old creature of the night that feeds on the blood of innocence. So, what now?
Who knows what fate has in store?
Lords of Shadow 2 was given pretty mixed reviews by the critics, a big fall from the reception of the original game. And after this, the Castlevania series has kind of been in limbo. Sort of. And I don't think it's all because of Lords of Shadow. Konami did a huge bit of restructuring in 2015, with them doing a pivot away from proper console games to focus on mobile and pachinko games instead. And this led to some serious criticisms of the company at that time, and that caused the sudden disappearance and cancellations of many of their popular franchises, including Metal Gear, Silent Hill, and Castlevania. Hideo Kojima famously left the company after poor treatment.
As you noticed, Hideo Kojima is not here with us tonight, and I want to tell you a little bit about that. But unfortunately, he was informed by a lawyer representing Konami just recently that he would not be allowed to travel to tonight's awards ceremony to accept any awards.
And went on to form his own studio, Kojima Productions. Koji Igarashi, after being forced to focus on mobile games, left Konami as well and joined Artplay, another mobile game company. But his story came full circle when he started up a Kickstarter in 2015 for Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, the spiritual successor to the Igavania-style Castlevania games, which raised over $5 million across 64,000 backers. And Iga managed to inject the same feel of his style of Castlevania, starring Miriam, a girl who has crystals with demonic power embedded into her skin. The support of this title even led to the creation of Bloodstained, Curse of the Moon, and Curse of the Moon 2, games in the style of the original Castlevania games, which I think were an absolute treat. And the icing on the cake? Bloodstained has sold over 2 million copies, meaning that it has surpassed the sales of any previous best-selling Castlevania title ever, as far as we know. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that. Now, while I won't cover Bloodstained in this video, let me know your interest in me covering that series in earnest at some point in the future, especially with the prequel title, The Scarlet Engagement, coming sometime next year. But let's get back to the question of where Castlevania is now, because while it hasn't had a game in 11 years, Castlevania I think is everywhere. Starting in 2017, Netflix launched an animated Castlevania show, complete with 4 seasons starring Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard, that ran into 2021, with the first 2 seasons adapting a lot of the original lore from Castlevania 3. There are a ton of criticisms of the show by avid fans of Castlevania, but I do think the early seasons of it did a lot of things right. Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard are entertaining and charming all the way through, as well as Dracula, who is immediately humanized and easy to feel some sympathy for. It's just as the series goes on, they stray further and further away from the lore, making plot lines a little corny and drawn out sometimes. Though the animation and fight scenes I still think are incredible, especially for being run by a Western team. But I think many fans, including myself, thought Castlevania would be an anthology series that went from Belmont to Belmont, with the first 2 seasons covering Trevor's story, then moving on to Christopher or Simon, etc. Though they kinda did this with 2023's Castlevania Nocturne, and it stars a bastardized Richter Belmont. I wanted to like this so bad. Everything about it isn't awful, it's just as I went through the season, I found myself asking why a lot. Why are the villains from Castlevania Bloodlines, which takes place during World War I, the villains of this season? Jolta Suentes got quite the glow up still. Why is Richter the most uninteresting character in his own series? I didn't get around to watching season 2, to be honest. It's just all of this feels like a missed opportunity. I don't know what the future of animated Castlevania holds and whether they'll adopt Symphony of the Night, for instance, but if that's the case, I'm not too excited for it.
You don't belong in this world.
You need to leave!
Then there is this mobile game, Castlevania Grimoire of Souls, which was developed for iOS in 2019, which funny enough goes back to the traditional Igavania style of characters in the main timeline. And the premise is that Alucard, living as Genya Arikado in modern times, received a letter that says the Grimoire has awoken, the darkness comes. So rightfully so, he checks the moon to make sure Dracula's castle didn't come back. But actually Lucy Westenra, a name straight out of Bram Stoker's Dracula, is the girl who sent the letter, and tells Alucard her magic books containing records of all the past events in the timeline is going wild. So Alucard must set the timeline right by traveling into the Grimoires. And this game is a 2D side-scrolling action game, and even though it's been 6 years since this came out, looking at this gives me hope. They made all new models for the characters, stashed in 6 playable ones, had Michiru Yamane and Ayami Kojima return for music and art respectively. But at the end of the day, it's still a mobile game. And this was re-released in 2021 in the Apple Arcade without the monetized slop. Though I don't know anyone who subscribes to Apple Arcade, so you guys let me know how that game is. And it's after this, all we see of Castlevania is crossovers. Crossovers for days. Simon and Richter joining the Super Smash Bros. Roster, Dead Cells return to Castlevania, an expansion to this popular roguelike title where you can play as Richter Belmont, Alucard, etc. V Rising, the Legacy of Castlevania, an expansion to the top-down action role-playing game where you control a vampire, but with this expansion, you can wear Alucard's clothes and kill Simon Belmont. And then these robots dressed like Richter and Alucard and Astrobot. Okay, this game had a lot of cameos, so I won't count this. And how can I forget Castlevania's inclusion in Dead by Daylight, where Dracula is a killer, alongside included survivors Trevor Belmont, Alucard, Soma, what do they do to you? And the Ode to Castlevania DLC for Vampire Survivors, which I think is the greatest crossover in this whole bunch. A bullet hell shoot 'em up game with endless waves of enemies that you can take down to upgrade your character to make them more efficient at taking down enemies. It's simple, but effective. And this was inspired by Castlevania in the first place, so I know the creator must feel good coming full circle with this expansion. This game is dirt cheap, and I guarantee it's worth your time. But Ode to Castlevania here brings in a full Castlevania-inspired map, complete with weapons, items, music, and enemies from Castlevania. And you can play as over 80 different characters from the series, which is insane. Sure, Simon and Alucard are here, but what about Ronaldo Gandolfi and Kerry Fernandez? Even Saint Germain gets a cameo. And while I've been working on these videos, they announced a free update to the expansion with 16 new characters, more music, etc. So with Castlevania seeming like it's in everything but Castlevania, what are my thoughts on the future of this series? I guess my answer is, I don't really know. I think the good news is that Konami seems to be moving differently lately, with new console games coming out for their most popular franchises. Metal Gear Solid 3 received a remake with Metal Gear Solid Delta, and they're asking fans which game they would like to see remade next in that series. Suikoden 1 and 2 got an HD re-release, and Silent Hill, after the infamous cancellation of Silent Hills, received a phenomenal remake of Silent Hill 2, and a new direction for the series with Silent Hill F. This I think is Konami testing the waters to see what they should put their weight behind, and I think all of these crossovers are them trying to keep the Castlevania brand relevant as a whole. Not to mention all the different collections of all the games that I've mentioned in this series available for PC and consoles, etc. The most recent being the Dominus collection, which has all 3 of the Nintendo DS games along with a revamped version of Haunted Castle. So it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. Next year is Castlevania's 40th anniversary, and I personally think that it will go one of 3 ways. 1, Castlevania stays locked in its coffin and we just keep moving on. 2, they announce a new title at the beginning of 2026 for an October release. Or 3, they announce a new title in 2026 to coincide with the 40th anniversary, but give a forward-looking release date for their next game. Castlevania is a series that is close to my heart, if it's not apparent. But I've been reading a lot of your comments, and even though many can say that this series is a niche one, it's made an impact on many generations of players. And whether the next step for the series is a return to Metroidvania, a classic style title, or a 3D action hack and slash, I'm sure we're all in for the next revival of Dracula. Thank you all for watching Mentoktober this year. The response has just been more than I can ask for. But stay tuned for the next series that I cover very shortly. So be safe out there, and have a happy Halloween. A huge thank you to my patrons on Patreon and members on YouTube. The Grack, Joel Miller, Carl256, Brooke Marshall, Justin Wang, Bonnie, Carla D, The Cold One, The New Kid on the Block, Randy Whitmore, Anapan, Steven Scott, Pro Gamer, Spencer, Dandy, Ben Z, Benjamin Love, Jess Dominguez, SQN is Good, Matozo, Brian Cisneros, Fat Goomba, The Clumsy Zeno, Yamans Graves, Gamika, Plank Samakun, and Kenny Lauderdale. Thank you all again for your support, and I'll see you all next time.